The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
There's a reason why we call CJ Big Money CJ around here, because when money talks, he is one to listen. A lot of money doled out the last few days. We have to start with Kirill Kaprizov. We call him Dollar Bill Kirill for a big reason, CJ, especially after this deal. 8 years, $136 million, $17 million annually, the richest contract in NHL history. How did we get here?
Well, that's a big money intro right there. I like that. Setting the tone early, Julian.
I'm trying.
What an interesting deal this is. I mean, I didn't think he was going to get this much. I'll start right there. When the Wild offered him $16 million per year last month, and I'm sure I said it at some point on the show, I sort of felt like that was the line in the sand, and I figured they would stick to their guns and he would eventually accept that because that's a lot of money. Well, credit to him and his camp. They pushed the bar up another $8 million, $1 million per season on the 8-year deal. And, Minnesota effectively bid against themselves here. And, they did it for a couple reasons. I think it's a perfect storm of things coming together. You've got a superstar player in Kaprizov who probably had his best season last year. Now, it gets tainted a little because he's injured, midway through the year and missed a whole bunch of time. But if you look at his performance in the first part of the season, I mean, we were talking about him as maybe a Hart Trophy candidate at that point. And I think he legitimately was in that conversation. Unfortunately, his health didn't allow him to stay there. You've got this surging cap, which is, you can't ignore that. The fact that also the NHL and the NHLPA for the first time ever have set the cap for the next few seasons. And, a couple interesting points on that. First of all, then when you're normally when any other player prior to this has negotiated a big deal, you're guessing it's going to go up, but both sides don't really know for sure. And you don't know by how much. Well, right now it's scheduled to go up from $95.5 million this season to 104 to 113.5. Speaking to some agents this week, they think it's actually going to end up being higher than 104 next year and then higher than 113.5 2 years down the road. And so all of a sudden now we're in a world where, the players know this and are armed with this information at the bargaining table. And I think that definitely gives a little bit more leverage to the player, a top player like this. I'm not saying this is going to affect every single player down, to the 23rd man on each roster, but it gives you the ability, I think, to push for more money because, while we might say, yeah, this contract is, I can't remember the exact number, 17.8%, I believe, of the cap right now. Well, if it's a $120 million cap in 2 years, it's already going to be down to 14%. It's already going to be whereabout you'd pay him. And so I think that had a huge impact. And then ultimately you have a Wild team, Julian, that they've spent a long time to get to where they are. They went through the pain of buying out Parise and Suter, which maybe kind of ironically, those were the last major contracts that organization signed. And they had to end up buying them out because they were so long at the time. But that made it very difficult to manage this team. But, they've developed a guy like Matt Boldy. They've brought in Brock Faber in a trade. They've got Eriksson Ek signed. They've got those other two guys signed long-term. Like they feel like they have the bones of a team that's going to, trending towards being a contender. And they didn't want to start again. If they risked losing Kaprizov, I mean, where are you in that project? And I say this, and I have a lot of affinity for Minnesota. I love going to games there. It's a killer rink. It's actually like an underrated, if you're looking for a good road city for a game. I actually think Minnesota should be on your list. But it's not a free agent destination at this point in time. And so I think that all that goes into the fact that they just decided, Craig Leopold, who proclaimed he's not going to get any more money anywhere else. And he backed that up, by signing a monster contract. And so, I think in a lot of ways, this is a perfect storm, but it's also a signal of where the league's going. I don't know that necessarily Jack Eichel and Kyle Connor and some of these other players that are sitting there, Martin Necas in Colorado that are also pending UFAs in 2026. These guys are going to get big deals. Don't get me wrong. I'm not sure any of those guys, I'd be surprised, in fact, if any of them got to 17 million, but we're not that far away from Cale Makar needing a new deal or Quinn Hughes. And if the cap goes up, as some of the agents have told me they expect it to, I think, we just jumped from a $14 million top NHL salary from Leon Draisaitl to $17 million for Kirill Kaprizov in 2026. Well, I think we're not that far off from seeing the $20 million per year player in the NHL, which is frankly been a long time coming if you see what's happening in the other sports.
One question I would love to ask, you don't have to ask it today. Maybe we do some kind of crystal ball thing. Who's going to be the first player to make $20 million? That is, I'm very intrigued at that. But you can save that answer for a future episode because I know that's a thinker.
It's a thinker, but look, the easy answer and then would be Connor McDavid, right? Like the easy answer, because the best player in the world needs a new deal starting in 2026. But, I think actually he's not likely even to exceed Kaprizov necessarily because he's probably signing a short-term contract. And, usually to push the bar up, typically players have had to sign the long-term deals. And so I'm not sure it's him. I'm going to put my stake right now on Makar.
Ooh,
and
okay.
I'm probably a little soon on that. If I'm being honest, like he probably doesn't quite get there, but I'll say Makar for now, just because I know if nothing else, producer Drew will get a shiver down his spine when he hears that answer.
Best defenseman in the game. He deserves to get paid $20 million.
Well, yeah, it's just, can he credibly argue for that? And here's the problem all players face, and it's a real thing, is if you want to be on a team that wins a Stanley Cup, it's hard to get paid exactly your true value. And in fact, you might credibly argue because you're limited to 20% of the cap, some players still can never get paid their true value because, a player like Connor McDavid probably is, what he's worth to the Edmonton Oilers and has been worth is probably more than 20% of the cap, in terms of, basically the revenue he's generated for that team and for the league. So, there's restrictions on players everywhere, but Makar's, put it this way, Makar's getting a big raise on his next deal. The question is just how big is it?
I can't wait till producer Drew hears this episode and is like, damn it. That's too expensive for Cale Makar. Anyway.
Maybe it's Austin Matthews. I'm trying to think of another star player that's like, he's a few years out and by then it's going to keep, if the cap keeps climbing, maybe it's someone like him too.
Yeah, that's also a solid option. Luke Hughes won't be getting $20 million per year, but he's still getting some money coming his way. 7 years, $63 million for the RFA with the New Jersey Devils. What do you think of the contract, and how did the New Jersey Devils get to this point?
It was a grind. This one was a difficult process to get to the point where they announced the deal, and obviously the pressure and everything around it amps up as the season gets closer. And Luke Hughes hasn't been in camp, and ultimately, I think the Devils moved up to get this deal done. I don't believe that they wanted to necessarily get to the $9 million mark, but, it's a shifting environment as, if we're talking about how it is at the top of the pay scale with Kaprizov, I mean, $9 million is upper middle class in this, league at this point in time. And the players that fall into that bin essentially, I think are also going to see a rise in what they're paid. And, the key for the Devils is they've just locked up Luke Hughes for, his entire 20s essentially. So, they've bought what are likely to be the best years that he's going to have in the league. And while $9 million was probably a little richer than they wanted to pay him per season, at least when those negotiations started, it's what it took to get him back on the ice and get him back in the fold. And it's weird to say this, but there might almost be kind of a family tax in there too, because there's a unique dynamic at play in this negotiation. Is that the fact his brother Jack is on the team, and Jack's deal is probably a little team friendly in the end. He's 8 times $8 million. And when you see the player he's become since signing that extension, the Devils are probably getting a little break on Jack's deal at this point in time. And so maybe, in a roundabout way, they're topping Luke up a little bit to try to augment that. And so, let's face it. I mean, all the focus in the offseason when you talk about the Hughes is can there be a way that all three of them play together? Well, you had to have two of them signed to have a chance to get the third one. Quinn's still got a couple years in Vancouver, and we'll see how things go there. But, it was a grind back and forth. And ultimately I think that they get to a spot that the Devils had to maybe go a little beyond their comfort zone, but it's a player they deem that it's worth doing that to give them a chance to get him on the ice. And, we're going to do predictions later in this episode. It's a big year for a team like the Devils, and I'm pretty high on what kind of season I think they're going to have. And so you need your impact young players in the lineup to have that year, right? So much of what kind of went sideways for them last year, I think, was injury related and things like that. So, you need your difference makers playing on the ice. And, I think Luke Hughes has the ability to be a difference maker for that team, especially as he continues to evolve his game and take steps in his career.
It's only the case for now, as Quinn Hughes is a UFA in 2027, but, Quinn Hughes right now, the lowest cap hit of all three Hughes brothers, if you can believe it. Well, 7.85
this won't even be a bold prediction. His next contract will take him to the highest cap hit of his brothers because he gets to go back to the bargaining table before they do. And he's got a Norris Trophy in his back pocket and might have multiple by that time. I mean, we'll just have to see where things end up. But he's doing just fine on that deal. And I think he's going to hit one into the upper deck on his next deal.
Not to go too deep into it with predictions, because you are right. We are going to delve into who's going to go where in each division. So sit tight for that. We've got a lot with that. But you're not the only person that seems pretty high on the New Jersey Devils. It seems with a deal like this, that's a massive commitment for a guy like Luke Hughes, who's shown so much talent. I'm curious what that means for the rest of that D-core and what this team could look like through the next couple of years with Luke.
Well, I mean, look, I think that change could be on the horizon there. Dougie Hamilton is naturally now going to be a player people discuss as in trade rumors, I would think. I don't mean that it's going to happen tomorrow by any means, but his contract, if you look the way it's structured this season, he has a full no movement clause, but beyond 25, 26, it goes away in terms of being a full no movement clause. He's got some limited clause beyond that point, but they might have to move some money around to make this go. I mean, the other name that's to some degree, I think people wonder about is Andre Palat, because he takes up a pretty big salary and didn't deliver certainly last year, a performance up to what he's paid. And so, there might have to be some shifting around as time goes on of players. They're also, they've got Jacob Markstrom playing out to set to play at the final year of his deal that, as we mentioned, on the previous episode. I mean, that they have, started exploring an extension for him. I think the issue with Markstrom is he's, 35, turning 36. What's the right term on that deal? But, I would think given what the heaven and earth they moved to get him there to begin with, there's a good chance of them extending him. So, the Devils are in a nice run. And, I just looking at these divisions as I have, and I actually did homework for this episode, which is rare, a little closer than like thinking about it more directly because, we're doing predictions for each division. I think the Metro it's a reasonably weak division, I think, compared to some of the others. So, for me, New Jersey's got a great opportunity to be a top seed or second seed. I think I've got them in the Metro. And then, they're obviously going to, like any team that's in that position, I think they'll be aggressive and trying to look for ways to improve as the year goes along and give themselves a chance at a long playoff run. Okay.
Two quick points before we get to those division and other predictions from Big Money CJ. I want you to start, if we can. Obviously, you've been covering the 5 players who were acquitted from the Hockey Canada trial earlier this summer. Yesterday was the first day where they were eligible to sign with new teams. No one signed. What's the latest on that situation?
Well, I would say there's a lot of uncertainty around it, if I'm being honest. I think that it's not totally clear where this is going to go yet. And so it's a bit of a tricky story. Obviously, it's a sensitive subject, especially for some of the teams that have been involved. I mean, we've already seen, Carolina be a team linked to 2 of those players, and they got a fair amount of backlash online, and some people frankly crossed the line. I'm not going to draw attention to some tweets because I don't want to give them more life, but it's been I think for teams that there's a calculus going on in some front offices. Like, is this worth it? Now, the one player I do feel pretty confident is going to get an NHL contract in the short term is Carter Hart. All indications are he's going to land with the Vegas Golden Knights. And they, as you mentioned, they can effectively sign him now. And as any of the other 3 players that are UFAs could sign deals, those contracts wouldn't be registered until the middle of October 15th. But, I do think you're going to see Carter at some point in the near future here end up officially with the Vegas Golden Knights. Where it goes for, Michael McLeod or Dylan Dubé in particular, I'm not certain, quite honestly. I mean, I know there have been talks that McLeod was going to go to Carolina guaranteed. I I don't believe that's still the case, that it's guaranteed. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but it certainly at least seems a little less certain than the way it was discussed, by some other reports in September. And, I'm not even saying that those reports were wrong at the time. I just think this is a delicate one. So, I will continue to stay on the story, but, I guess I'm not sure if these players are going to be signed, at least right now. Maybe there's a longer path back. Maybe it does happen, but it's been a hard one to get clear answers on. And honestly, I think a lot of the direct people involved with trying to get the players new contracts, they're not sure themselves. So, part of the uncertainty is just the general uncertainty around the situation.
And one more for you. Connor Ingram has a new home. He is now a member of the Edmonton Oilers. It seemed like they were fine with Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard attending the goal, but now Connor Ingram joins the fold.
I think this is a savvy move by Edmonton, because the key part of this trade is that Utah, first of all, the Oilers didn't send anything to Utah. It was the classic future considerations, which literally means nothing. And Utah still retained $800,000 of Connor Ingram's cap hit. So his cap hit for when he's in the NHL with the Oilers is $1.15 million. Well, guess what? He cleared waivers last week, and the Oilers are starting him down in the American Hockey League in Bakersfield. And when he's in Bakersfield, he costs exactly $0 on the Oilers cap sheet. So the way to look at this is they got a player for free. I mean, obviously they do have to pay him that money, but they acquired an asset without giving anything up. He's a goalie. If you look at his past, has had some really strong seasons, had a couple nice seasons in Arizona. And last year didn't go his way, and he did spend time in the player assistance program, following the death of his mother. I think he's shown that he could be something. And if you're a team like Edmonton, who, yes, you say, I'm sure they are fine with Skinner and Pickard, but you need, you might want a little extra options, because keep in mind, all three of those goalies now are pending UFAs. So this could end up being a longer term move. It could end up being, if Connor Ingram doesn't perform well in the AHL, we might never see him in Edmonton. Like it's hard to say exactly where this is going to go, but I think from the Oilers standpoint, there's no risk in doing this. You get the player in the AHL, you get to get him up to speed and see what he has. And if you need, either through performance or injury problems with the NHL team, you've now got, someone with a pretty strong resume to turn to in net, because, let's face it, I think the Oilers goaltending situation is a point of focus. It's not an easy one to correct. You look at the fallout. Anthony Stolarz doing his extension. If Markstrom gets extended in New Jersey, I know Minnesota would like to extend Philip Gustafsson. I mean, it's going to be a pretty barren UFA class for goaltenders in 2026. I mean, you have potentially Skinner, Pickard, Ingram, but you don't have a lot of frontline obvious upgrades if you're the Oilers in that regard. So long story short, I think there's no risk for Edmonton with this move, and it could be one that pays off handsomely if Connor Ingram has a good season.
All right, CJ, we've run through the news of the day for our show. It's time for predictions. Are you ready?
I'm ready, buddy. Just because I did my homework, so I'm feeling good about it.
I don't know. I could probably count on one hand the amount of times you've done homework for this show, and we've done almost 400 episodes.
Well, when this went in the group chat that we were doing this, I was like, if I don't do my homework, it's going to be a lot of like thinking on the fly, which doesn't necessarily make for the best audio. So in this case, I'm trying to make the segment a little better.
Here's how this segment's going to work. CJ is going to run through, we're going to run through every division. CJ's going to tell us who's going to finish where, who's going to make the playoffs. After that, we're going to have your picks for some of the big awards and a very early Cup final prediction. That sound okay? Does that sound in line with what you've gotten prepared for?
Yeah, I'm good to go.
Let's do this. Let's start with an easy one, a division that we're both going to focus a lot of our attention on because of the teams that we cover, the Atlantic Division. I kind of last episode asked, who could be in that top three. We're starting to get into it. This should be a pretty easy one for you. Let's start there. Give me your top teams in that division.
Okay, in order, I've got Toronto winning the division for a second straight year, followed by the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Florida Panthers. So those would be guaranteed playoff spots. Third.
Okay.
Fourth, I have the Montreal Canadiens. Fifth, the Ottawa Senators. sixth, the Buffalo Sabres, seventh, Detroit Red Wings, and in the basement, the Boston Bruins, who just don't have enough up front for me to have a lot of confidence in. Plus, I do think, to be fair, this is a very competitive division. I mean, there's somebody has to finish last, and this is a tough division.
Okay, there's so much to unpack here. I've been saying on the pod with how Florida could start the year with some of the injuries. Maybe that gives them a step back. Maybe they end up being a wild card team. You think they're still a top 3 team in that division. Then we still think of them as a cup contending team. It's just the mileage, the runway, the injuries. Why do you have them third?
I mean, they've been to 3 straight cup finals. I mean, you can spin that as a negative thing or like a something that's going to hold them back, which I do. Look, there's could be something there. Maybe I'm wrong. But I view it as top to bottom, an incredibly deep team. I have a lot of faith in their front office. I think that they've shown they've been bold. They've made some really nice trades over the years. And I think that they're going to use the cap space that they get from Alexander Barkov's injury to make some kind of addition in the season. And I think even without him, they still have a top 6 that most teams would die for. Even without him and Matthew Tkachuk, they're that deep. Great blue line, great goaltending. I just don't see any holes there. Obviously, you get a few holes kind of shot through your roster with the injuries, but they have the experience. And, while when I'm picking them third, I'm not saying they're going to have a poor year. I just think that I don't see them falling into wild card positioning, but we'll see what happens.
Toronto, you said they would win the division again. This is the first year post Mitch Marner. What do you think the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to be like in that era, or at least to start?
Well, look, it's a loss there as well, but I do think the Leafs have been a top team for a long time. I think they found something last year under Craig Berube that brought them a lot of success. And I do think that there's a way forward for them. I mean, they're going to have a third line with Nicholas Waugh, Dakota Joshua, and somebody. I mean, they're still kind of settling on where that goes. Those are all new players to this team. I think that they've definitely improved their bottom 6. They're going to, obviously likely lose a little bit of scoring with the loss of Marner, but I also anticipate a healthier Austin Matthews, getting back to where he's been in the past. And I just think that it's right there for them, quite frankly. And I think that the motivation will remain high, for the Leafs because of some of the things that have gone on. So, I don't think it's a hot take to say the team that had 108 points last year and won the division is going to win it again. Really what it came down to is you're weighing them against Tampa and Florida in my case, because I think they're the top 3 teams still in the Atlantic. And, I have some concerns about the Andrei Vasilevsky situation with the Lightning. And you could put them in a hat. I mean, quite frankly, those 3 spots, it could go down to the last weekend of the season before those are decided. So I don't necessarily see a vast gap between these teams, but you got to order them some way or another. And then, the tricky two, frankly, for me was then what do I do with Montreal and Ottawa?
I was going to get to that next.
You know what I mean? Because if I'm going to stand on the position that I think Toronto, Tampa, Florida take the top 3 spots, how do I sort through what happens in Montreal and Ottawa? I mean, for me, Montreal, they might be one of the most interesting teams in the whole league, like just straight up, just with the sort of young stars power they have there. It's kind of, even though they made the playoffs last year and obviously they're going to be dealing with some expectations, to me, it's still another season that's a little bit of a freebie in the sense it's all just like, what can this be? Right. Like it's still kind of the honeymoon phase, I'd say, especially bringing Demidov into the lineup on a full-time basis this season. There's lots of things I could say that aren't perfect with the team. Obviously down the middle, I think that's going to be something that they really do have to address. And obviously they're aware of and want to do that. But I mean, this is an exciting time for the Canadians. And I think that's going to give them a slight edge over the Senators. And frankly, I think it's very possible we're seeing 5 playoff teams out of the Atlantic. Like it's not that I'm necessarily saying I see Montreal and Ottawa falling out of the playoff spots that they put those teams are in last year, but I do think it's a crammed division, man. Unless someone really falls off, like unless you're right and Florida tumbles down to 6th or 7th. I mean, the truth is that everyone else in that division is fighting for scraps just to get in.
I want to stick back with Montreal and Ottawa here because I think they're still in the same place, but I'm very intrigued about what specifically with, or maybe you should focus more on the Ottawa side because you did bring up the Montreal side, but what is it about Ottawa that you would have them just a notch below the Canadiens where it was the opposite last year?
Well, I don't know how much internal, like I know the internal growth is obviously a focus for the Senators. I just don't know how much better you get with that. I'm actually not chipping away at the notion. Like I do think it's a thing, but I don't look at the Senators and be like, okay, they're going to have a 7-point improvement in the standings. You know what I mean? Like I just think that I think they're a good team. They were really hard to play against last year. Like I heard that even talking to players, a lot of respect around the league for the Senators, the way how competitive the games were when you went into a game with Ottawa. I think that's something that they've sort of turned around. If you go back a few years, wasn't always the case, but I don't see the path to them getting way, way better this season. That's where I landed. Whereas I think Montreal can still take a step. Frankly, some of it is putting, a player like Demidov literally can be a difference maker. Like he might win them a few games, which, a few games is a few more points in the standings. And so I think it's going to be very neck and neck. Like this wasn't one that I have a ton of conviction about, other than to say, I think Montreal has more room to grow in this very specific season than I see the Senators growing compared to where they were last year. I think Ottawa, they had a great season last year. I don't think they left very much on the table last year. And that would, frankly, it's going to be the challenge this year. Probably, obviously you want to push the bar higher and higher. It wasn't an off season where they went out and made a whole bunch of moves that made you go, oh, wow, like there's huge growth here. So, you have to count on that internal growth, but I think they're going to be a similarly good team to last year, but I just don't see a huge jump in points. And if you don't have that jump in points, the bottom line is you're still in a wild card position overall.
And your bottom three, you can remind me of the order, but I think you had it Buffalo, Detroit, Boston. Correct.
Yeah. And, that's tough because Buffalo and Detroit are two cities that have wanted to do what Montreal and Ottawa did last year, right? To see their teams get back to, get back to the playoff spots. But the path is so tough. I mean, I don't have to tell them. I actually think a lot of good things are happening in Buffalo. But I just don't see them leapfrogging the other teams, frankly. And then with the Bruins, they started a retool on the fly. And as I mentioned, I just think their forward group in particular gives me a lot of concern. A healthy Hampus Lindholm, hopefully a healthy Charlie McAvoy, Jeremy Swayman with a full camp. Like I think that they're not falling to the very bottom of the league, but I do think they're in the bottom of the Atlantic.
Okay. We've run through the Atlantic Division. Let's go over to the Metro Division. Who do you have winning the division and everyone else on down?
Probably the easiest decision among division winners. I'm going with the Carolina Hurricanes, who have frankly just been the class of that division for, quite a while now. So start Carolina and then in order, New Jersey second, the Rangers third, the Washington Capitals fourth. Which is interesting, right? Because as I said, if I think Montreal and Ottawa could both make it, when you get to the fourth place spot in the Metro, it's like, well, does that team edge one of those two out? So Washington obviously had a great regular season last year. I think it's going to be tough for them to recreate that on a number of levels. And then you've got Columbus, the New York Islanders, Philadelphia, and the Pittsburgh Penguins in the basement.
Okay. The Carolina Hurricanes, they've had these playoff runs. They seem to run into the wall that is the Florida Panthers, and they can't get over that hump. Is this the year they do it? Do you see anything in this team that suggests that they could finally put themselves in the Stanley Cup final with the core that they have?
Well, adding the players they did in the offseason does help, right? They made some big trades and made a big trade with the Rangers to give K'Andre Miller, and then got Nikolai Ehlers as a free agent. So, I could see what I give the Hurricanes credit for is that they don't rest on their laurels. Like, I know they took a lot of criticism in the league for, I don't really understand it still, frankly, but for making the Mikko Rantanen deal and then trading him again at the deadline, like some people seem to view that as like a sign of weakness. I view that as a sign of strength. I mean, they're thinking creatively. They're not afraid to be bold. I think if you look at those moves in totality, they came out on a strong end of it. They used those picks now in part to make the trade they made with the Rangers. Like, I think that they're aggressively trying to win. And so, I don't know if this will be the year, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's the year. Like, if this team breaks through at some point and gets the Stanley Cup final or even wins the Stanley Cup, is anyone really going to be that surprised? I mean, we've seen them coming for so long now, and I know that they get to that conference final position and they've gotten beaten soundly in that round, the third round, a couple times. But every year they're winning. We're talking about a team that's winning playoff rounds, that's getting that experience, and then at the front office level, they're making fairly significant changes to the roster to get over the top. So, I like everything about what the Hurricanes are doing. I think they could use still another superstar. They could use a Kirill Kaprizov or one of these players. And I think they'd love to get their hands on one of them. They've been involved in conversations on any player of any consequences that's moved in the last year or so. And obviously they did make the Rantanen deal, and ultimately, he didn't show a willingness to sign there. And so, it didn't happen. So I'm very bullish on the Hurricanes. I do think that they're going to be better this season from where they were last year. And last year they were good enough to get to the third round again. So, to me, in a division where they're maybe not being pushed from below as much as some other divisions, I think they're in a great spot to cruise to a division title there.
So what about the New Jersey Devils? I find, and it's not just you, I find a lot of people around the league kind of see them as like the sexy dark horse pick to make some noise. What is it about the New Jersey Devils that makes them so enticing for people around the league to see them take a step up this year?
Funny thing is, I wasn't even aware that they were becoming a dark horse pick. But what I look at as a team 2 years ago, 3 years ago, like they've been on a good trajectory themselves. Last year was a step back, and I think, as I mentioned, losing a Jack Hughes like they did, they just had. It was one of those seasons that felt like they could never get their whole roster together, and didn't really go their way. I think that you look at the way that roster looks though on paper, and to me, I assume that doesn't happen a second straight year. You can never know. There's some unknowables out there. This isn't the odds of my predictions being exactly right are pretty low, if we're being honest. But this is, as I see it entering the season, I just think that's still a really deep team that doesn't have a lot of obvious holes to me. So, I think that they will be the next best team in the Metro. And then, I've got the New York Rangers having a bounce back as well behind them. Right. And again, those teams have all been like, I feel like the groups have been pretty good now for a few years there. I mean, the Rangers aren't that far removed from a President's Trophy team. They've made significant changes to the roster since winning that President's Trophy. Removing some sort of kind of iconic core type players from the mix. But, I still think they're going to be competitive. I really believe the Mike Sullivan hiring is going to have a positive impact on what goes on with the Rangers. And so, I see that those three teams for sure in the Metro being playoff teams. It's hard for me to say Washington's going to miss. But, if you're making me declare that much, I think they're the next best team in the division and they'll finish fourth. But, for the Capitals, to me, there's going to be, you're not going to have the magic of Alex Ovechkin's goal chase, which clearly I think that helped buoy the spirits there. I think the Capitals have actually done a really nice job as a front office, maybe a little under the radar on a national standpoint of just all the turnover they made 2 summers ago that led to that great regular season they had last year. And they won the Metro Division last year in the regular season. So, I think that they're on a good path, but I'm just forecasting a little bit of a step back. The vibes aren't quite the same. Ovechkin is another year older. Full credit to him. I wasn't calling a 43 goal season or whatever he had last year. I think it's going to be very difficult for him to recreate that. And, a lot went right for them. They kind of found something there. And, I just think that, while I don't see them having some precipitous fall off, I think they're going to take a small step back, and that's why I've got them down in the division.
44 goals last year, and he played through part of the season on a broken leg. One more Ovechkin question for me. He's at 897 right now. Are there plans for when Ovechkin eventually reaches the 900 goal mark? Like 900 is a nice round number. We already know he has the all-time goals mark, but 900 is pretty significant.
Yeah, it'll be a big deal. I don't think it'll be on the scale, obviously, of when he passed Wayne Gretzky's all-time record. where you saw Wayne and the commissioner, Gary Bettman, and everybody in attendance, and they stopped the game and all that stuff. But I mean, 900, the funny thing about 900 is it wouldn't surprise me if it happened the first week of the season. Like, it could happen. Yeah. So it's not going to be the same build up or anything like that, but you're right. It's the first player ever did 900 goals. Could be the last player that ever gets there. I don't know what the future holds, but it'll be a big deal. And I think it'll be something the Capitals rally around too. I mean, I talked to Tom Wilson for a story about a month ago now, and he was mentioning like how exciting he thinks that'll be and how cool that'll be. But at a certain point, he's already the king of the castle. It's you can give him a few more gifts maybe, but he's already got everything. Does Alex Ovechkin when it comes to goal scoring in NHL history?
Okay, run me through the bottom four of the Metro Division, because it seems like right now you've got the Caps just missing the playoffs. It seems, or maybe like bumping Ottawa out
on the last day of the season. I don't know.
Ooh,
but that's okay. I guess my point is this: that's my tension point of this exercise from the Eastern Conference. Mm-hmm. And then I've got Columbus, the Islanders, the Flyers, and the Penguins. And Columbus is a team on the rise, but I still think a lot went really well there last year too. I mean, obviously it was born out of the tragedy of losing Johnny Gaudreau, but full credit to the Blue Jackets, played down to the last game of the season, second last game of the season for them, with a chance to qualify for the playoffs. So they were absolutely in the mix. And frankly, where I've got them here, they're going to be in the mix again, because fifth in the division, is that could theoretically make the playoffs. I think they'll be right there. I don't see them breaking through over one of these other teams, entering the year. The Islanders, interesting team, new GM with Matthew Darche, some veteran players there. I wonder if at some point we're talking about them trading one or more of those players, if the season doesn't start too well. But I think that they have a lot of ground to make up, and just don't see them really being a playoff team. The Flyers are still in their rebuild, and the Penguins, I think there's a world the Penguins finish last in the NHL, depending on what kind of in-season moves they make. If they end up trading players like a Brian Rust, a Rickard Rakell, maybe even Erik Karlsson, but if they end up moving key pieces off that roster, I think it's going to be a long year in Pittsburgh.
Do we have a fancy phrase for Gavin McKenna yet?
I know what you mean.
Like we had Fail for Nail Yakupov years ago. I don't know what slacking for Gavin, that doesn't really rhyme. I don't know. I'll
leave that up to the internet, because they always have better ideas than me. But I think that, if you're a Penguins fan, you're hoping that they're in the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes, probably. I mean, I'm sure if you're a Penguins fan, you're mixed, right? You're seeing all this talk about Sidney Crosby and potentially him leaving. And, there's all these, even Rust has ties to their last cup teams. But you probably are ready for the Band-Aid to be ripped off in some ways and to start looking ahead to the future. And they've definitely got some nice prospects in that organization, but they need more. And landing Gavin McKenna, he could go from Penn State, not too far, to Pittsburgh there. I think that would be a pretty good outcome if you're the Penguins.
Yeah, not to mention the other superstars that the organization has had in their history. It would be a nice changing of the guard, a passing of the torch.
No pressure, kid. It goes like Lemieux to Yager to Crosby to Malkin to McKenna. I mean, I don't know if that's fair to put him in that conversation before he's even played an NCAA game, but obviously a hugely highly touted prospect in the league, and I do think Pittsburgh's going to be in the draft lottery versus fighting for a playoff spot down the stretch.
Okay, let's move on to the Western Conference. Let's begin with the Central Division. Who do you got, Siege?
I wrestled with this one. This was not an easy division for whatever reason for me to order, especially the teams at the top. But I landed on the Colorado Avalanche, winning the division title, followed by Dallas, Winnipeg, Minnesota, Utah, St. Louis, Nashville, and Chicago. And so if you go bottom up, it's like, Chicago. I'm just saying Chicago, Nashville, to me, I don't think there's any controversy about that. I mean, that's sort of to be expected, but St. Louis, I have 6. They were a playoff team last year. And haven't been like weakened in any obvious way. I just think that there's some teams on the rise, and I've got Utah, one of them, up to 5th. Which again will have them very much in the playoff conversation for a wildcard spot in the West based on how I look at it. But I do think that Utah's poised to take a small jump forward. And then I like the Wild too. So, I think that, getting Kaprizov done and, they've got a pretty strong team. So they're fourth. But then, Winnipeg has been the best regular season team the last couple of years, if you look across a couple seasons. So I've have them down in third, but this is a competitive division. I mean, I could see the Stanley Cup winner coming out of this division. That's how strongly or how highly I think of it. And yeah, what do you think? Where did I screw up?
I don't know if you screwed up anywhere. I do have a lot of questions, of course, and taking your lead and going bottom up. If Chicago is in the basement again, what silver lining can you get out of that year? I know they have a ton of young players, and it's still going to take them a while before they're really, truly competitive. But for a guy like Connor Bedard, who goes first overall to that organization, and I'm not him, I can't speak for his feelings, but the losing, especially for certain young players who end up in those situations, it gets grating, and you worry about the fact that it just gets baked in, and that's what they're just going to be accustomed to. What silver lining could you possibly have if you're in Chicago and you're facing another season where you're likely going to be in the basement?
It's hard for me to concoct one. I mean, the silver lining, I guess, is just sort of the obvious that they do have a lot of prospects that are going to develop into players as time goes along, and it's going to be exciting, you would think, when they get to that day. But this is also the last year Connor Bedard is playing on an entry-level contract. When they come back for the 2026-27 season, he's going to be getting paid a lot more money than what he's paid right now. Just a fact of life. They haven't signed that contract yet, but he's obviously going to be due a pretty sizable raise at that point in time. And it doesn't always happen right away. I guess the silver lining would be, if you're Chicago, look at the number one team that I've picked in the division, Colorado. Mm-hmm. And there was a time early on when Nathan McKinnon didn't immediately become the superstar he is today after being drafted first overall. There was a season where Colorado by far finished last in the league. I believe they actually lost the draft lottery that year and ended up drafting Makar with the number 4 pick after quote unquote losing the number 1 pick, which was obviously a turning point among many. But, sometimes it doesn't happen right away is the point. We've seen teams draft first overall and that player becomes, way back when the Penguins drafted Crosby, they missed the playoffs his first season, but he had 100 points and then they didn't miss it again for 16 years. Sometimes a player like that and joins a team on the right trajectory and it's an amazing run for that organization. I think in other situations it takes time and, it's just going to require a little more patience in my view for the Blackhawks, but they didn't do a whole lot this summer, which it's not a point of criticism. I think that it's going to take a while for them to be that team that's climbed up the division, and so, maybe I'm wrong here, but I would be surprised if they finished any higher than 7th in the division. I think between them and it was a debate for me between them and Nashville for who's in the basement, and I went with the Blackhawks.
Geez, for Nashville to still be in that basement too, I don't know why. This is maybe not a perfect analogy, but do you remember when the Philadelphia Eagles, in 2011, made all those free agent moves and they had the dream team and they didn't make the playoffs after? Nashville, we're going to look back at that free agent class from last year where they were able to get Steven Stamkos, they were able to get Brady Shea, they were able to get Jonathan Marchessault. It's looking like it's trending towards being a disaster. This was a team that maybe should have been rebuilding a while ago. Their young players looked as if they were going to hold them up. And now they're not a playoff team. It's pretty disappointing.
Well, the reality is if I'm right about this prediction, and if they are in that spot, we're going to, as this season goes along or into next summer, be talking about, do they trade some of those players, right? I mean, that would be I think the reality is if they do have another season like the one I'm projecting for them here, then I think they have to ask those tough internal questions and do something, speed up a rebuild in some way or retool or whatever, phrase they're going to use to attach to it, because, that wasn't what they went and made those signings for, right? They made those signings because they had made the playoffs the year before, kind of surprisingly, and thought they were on the upturn. I mean, the other unfortunate thing you have here, and I know the reports have been good out of training camp, but, Roman Josi, had, I can't remember the name of the condition he has, but, he was, he's 35 years old and he's coming off that. I mean, it's just, the difference makers on this team are kind of getting up there in age, and I don't see enough push from below. So Yeah, that's where I landed with the Preds.
Pot syndrome is what Roman Josi had. Just looking it up here, not to.
Well, and I hope, honestly, I hope, again, everything like I've seen is that it's positive for Roman, but I'm just saying he's already 35. He's now dealing with, pretty serious health condition. That guy is a Norris Trophy. If that player even just fades a little bit, it makes it's a big change for a team like the Predators. So, I think they're in the soup a little bit in this division. But as I mentioned too, it's a very competitive division. I could make a case for like 4 of those teams, like Colorado, Dallas, Winnipeg, or Minnesota could win the cup in my eyes. I know Minnesota would be in the long shot category, but I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that the Wild could do it. So, I mean, if you're in a division that, if that's actually the case, well, somebody's got to finish at the bottom.
Wait. Did you say Colorado, Winnipeg, Minnesota? Dallas is in that 4.
And Dallas, yeah. Did I say, if I didn't say Dallas, it's just because I missed them. But yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Colorado and Dallas to me are top tier cup contenders entering the season. I'd probably have Winnipeg in the next tier and then Minnesota in sort of the longer shot tier. But I mean, it's still 4 teams that I could, as we're looking out before they've played a game this year, I could imagine a scenario where they have a great season and go on that kind of playoff run. I don't think it's beyond them. Whereas, if I look over to the Pacific Division, after
don't skip steps. We're not in Pacific yet.
But after a couple teams at the top of that division, I have a harder time getting there with a few other teams that it can even be possible that at the end of 2026 season, one of them slips in the cup.
I know there's one team in that Central Division I'm a little higher on than the other, but I do love the. Do I want to tip my hand early before we get to the award portion of the prediction show?
All right.
I don't know. But I do agree with you. I think the way that the Central seems stacked at the top, obviously we talked about Kaprizov earlier in the episode, the fact that Minnesota, they want to be a cup contending team. I think they're still ways away from that. Colorado, though, I think how many times have they gotten out of the first round in the last 3-4 years? I know the cup win is still very much in the rear view mirror, but that's a franchise I look at. If you're Nathan McKinnon, you're getting impatient, right? I'm very, very intrigued about how this season goes for them.
Yeah. I mean, I think he wakes up every day impatient, Nathan McKinnon. He's a very driven man, but he also gets a say in it, right? And, they had a lead in Game 7 against Dallas last year in the third period. And then Mikko Rantanen's show took over. So, that was a pretty epic first round series. I'll tie this all back to my disdain for this playoff format. We can say they haven't got out of the first round, but they also had to play a conference final in round 1 last year. So if we had a more equitable system, maybe that team still gets to the third round and that's where they face Dallas. And then it's an epic battle. Who knows? I mean, it's just saying that you can't make excuses because at the end of the day, you're right. Everyone's measured on winning. They're going to have a decision on their head coach if they don't move forward. All these things, jobs are tied to winning those playoff rounds, no matter who you draw. But I think there is a small asterisk I want to attach to them being a first round exit last season.
That's true. Let's go to the Pacific Division. Who do you have winning that division? And give me every other team.
I've got the Edmonton Oilers flying the flag at the top of the Pacific Division, followed by the Vegas Golden Knights, Los Angeles Kings, Vancouver Canucks, Anaheim Ducks, Calgary Flames, Seattle, and San Jose once again in the basement.
Edmonton once again at the top of the division. Why are you high on Edmonton again? I mean, there's 2 big reasons why.
Well, I think that it's as much as there's certainly some uncertainty there with Connor McDavid's situation. I think that there's also urgency, and the urgency is created by 2 straight cup, trips to the cup final and losing. The urgency is created by not knowing what's going to happen with McDavid and wanting to make the most of this season. I think the urgency is created by they're tired, they're sick and tired of I think especially starting the seasons poorly. The last couple of years, even though they did rebound and go all the way to the cup final and get pretty close to winning the thing, they did have terrible starts to the season. And I think they're going to change that. I think it's a huge point of focus to be, crisp and ready to go, basically starting next week. So, I think the Oilers are going to be on it from day one. I think they've got every reason, even though they're going to try to win a cup again. I think they're not going to take anything for granted as this season goes along. And so to me, I don't see any big reason for a fall off with their team. I mean, there's been some changes there, but they still have two absolute horses pulling on the rope. And, I think it's going to be a fascinating season for the Oilers, just to see how everything plays out and what happens with McDavid, obviously, but also how they react to all those things. And there's definitely some unknowns in that.
What about Vegas in second place?
I mean, they've added Mitch Marner. They've lost Alex Pietrangelo. I do think as time goes on, we'll probably see them try to address their D in some way, shape, or form. But let me say that I do think that, that they've been a top team. They'll be a top team. The best thing as I look at this, Julian, that I've predicted, and I didn't even think of it when I did it, we will not have an Edmonton Los Angeles first round series because it's going to be Vegas.
No.
It's for the first time in what would be now 5 years. It's been 4 years in a row, but I've got Vegas LA as the first round series that's coming. So, I think that those are really Vegas and LA are two teams I think have sort of a right to believe that they're contenders as well. And LA is an interesting case with it being Anze Kopitar's last year. They're going to want to send him out well. And they've been a team trying to break through themselves. For them, the hurdle has been the Edmonton Oilers that they haven't been able to get past. But I do think that things are coming around there. And, it's had sort of an interesting off season. We saw Ken Holland add a lot of veteran type players to that team, but I think that to me, those three are clearly sort of the class of the division. And
what about Vancouver in fourth? I'm curious to know if you think that team is a playoff team this year.
I do. I think they get back there. Everything that could go wrong went wrong for them last year. I can't imagine you're going to see Elias Pettersson have a season anything like he had last season. They've kind of opened the windows. Fresh air is blowing in. Adam Foote is a popular coach that they've added who was on the staff prior, but he's now the head coach. Quinn Hughes, I think, is a motivated individual. It's a big year for someone like him too, right? It's an Olympic year. We haven't even touched on that, but players that are kind of going to be ramping up for the Olympics, I think can sort of push their club teams along because, there's going to even be an extra carrot in front of them for motivation and to be pushing themselves. So, I do think, re-signing Besser in the offseason, to me, the Canucks are still, they're a good team, just maybe a little shy of being a great team. And they also seem reasonably well positioned to be aggressive for in-season additions to maybe try to bolster, especially maybe another center. Much like the Montreal Canadiens, I think they're kind of shopping in the same aisle at the supermarket as things go along. So I think to me, they're back in the playoffs. And then I've got Anaheim in fifth, taking a step as a young team that's finding itself. The first season with Joel Quenneville as their head coach, big for them to get Mason McTavish signed last weekend and have him now skating with the team. Didn't end up missing all of camp. So I think that they're a team on the rise. And for them, they would be disappointed to hear that I've got them just on the wrong side of the playoff cutoff mark. But I mean, where I have them is in the mix to make the playoffs. I have them playing important games essentially right up until the end of the season, trying to fight for a wild card spot. And so I do think, I think I see good things on the horizons for the Ducks. I don't think they get the whole way there this season. Then I have Calgary probably taking a little bit of a step back. I mean, last year they were kind of that team. I don't see it as a major step back necessarily. I mean, having them in sixth could also have them right in that playoff mix, depending on where we end up with how much parity there might end up being this year. But if they end up finishing sixth, again, they have interesting kind of decisions pending on Rasmus Andersson, who would probably likely be moved in that scenario. They have some other veteran players. If they open that door and want to start, doing something, continuing the rebuild or retool, then I think that they're sort of an interesting team that could be a seller at some point in time. They're certainly not taking that posture entering the season. obviously they want to prove people like me wrong, but I've got them out of the playoffs. And then the Seattle Kraken just think they've got a long way to go, and San Jose is, they're knee deep in the bog right now. They've got so much to look forward to as a team, but they kind of right now they're still in the stage where they've got the really good young players that certainly aren't what they're going to be fully, and then they've got a lot of veterans around them trying to create the right atmosphere. But they're players that'll probably be, a lot of them will be on trade lists as soon as we start doing those things.
One team that I'm very intrigued about their direction is Seattle. Like, I'm not surprised to hear the placement of some of the teams. Like, I know you mentioned maybe some guys in Anaheim would be disappointed. I don't think too many of them would be. I think as long as they see progression, that's fine. Calgary, I think with where they're placed in the division, I'm not surprised they're out of it. I just wonder, I just knowing the fan base, like hearing them in sixth, it's like, is there a way they could be seventh or eighth to put themselves in a position where they could go for Gavin McKenna, excuse me. But for Seattle, like, this is a team that was in the playoffs a few years ago, and it just feels like they've just been floating back ever since. Like, I'm curious what you think about their trajectory right now with the pieces that they have.
Well, they didn't get the same benefits as Vegas when they entered the league. They still got a reasonable base, but I think in some ways the expectations might have been inflated a little bit just because of what Vegas had done. And then, they did start second season, make the playoffs, win a round, right? They knocked Colorado out, if I'm not mistaken, in their second season in existence. Mm-hmm. You wonder if they're on the go, they go and they spend money, right? They bring in Chandler Stevenson and Brandon Montour. But I still think that they're missing the real high end difference makers that carry teams to the top. And typically you only get those players through drafting them. And so while they are sort of in no man's land a little bit, I do think that finishing who knows, if they finish seventh in the division, they could very plausibly win the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes, and maybe that changes everything. But I think they need, Matty Benier is a really nice young player, but I think they need someone higher up the pecking order to truly turn it around as a franchise. And it's going to be a progression. It has been it's been a tough go there. I think that, with Lane Lambert brought in as their head coach, they're probably going to switch to try to be a defensive minded team. Lane spent a lot of time, he was with the Islanders earlier in his career. Like, I could see him, if you think of the Barry Trotz, Lane Lambert Islanders, or even if you want to go way, way back to the Predators of old when those two were coaching there. I mean, I think that they're going to try to win games 2-1, basically. But they ultimately, for them to become more of a team that's making a noise in the division, I think they need some difference making talent.
So we ran through the divisions. It's now time for your way too early award predictions and a cup final prediction. I've got a couple different awards here. I'm curious, in your studies for your homework, how many awards did you write out potential answers for?
5.
5 awards. Off the top of my head, I'm guessing you have a Calder Trophy pick, a Norris Trophy pick, an Art Ross, a Rocket Richard, and a Hart Trophy pick.
No, I didn't even do those Rocket Richard ones. I did Selke, Vezina.
You did Selke and Vezina. Oh, yeah, sorry. Vezina should be on that list, of course.
I could improv on the others, but...
you don't have to do that. Well, we can stick with Selke and Vezina.
They go together because, I've got Connor McDavid winning the Hart Trophy. Let's get right to the chase. And look, hardly a hot take. The guy's won it 3 times already. But I just think hearing him talk about his preparation for this season and hearing some of the stuff I've heard out of Toronto with his insane workouts this offseason, I just think I think it's going to be full beast mode for Connor McDavid. I don't think it's motivated by the contract in any way, although that probably won't hurt, but there's going to be a lot of attention on him. There always is. And I think I just think a focused and driven McDavid. I mean, who's going to rise above that in the Hart Trophy conversation? And so for him to win a Hart Trophy, because he set the bar so high for himself, I think he's got to win the Art Ross, right? Like, I think the scenario that I'm sketching out here involves him being the leading point scorer in the league, and maybe, but with a little bit of margin over the next best player in order to ultimately win the Hart Trophy. So, I think I'll give McDavid the Art Ross and the Hart. I'd love to give him the Rocket Richard as well, just because he's been talking lately. I don't know if you've seen about wanting to score more goals.
Yeah, I've seen that.
But I don't. I'm going to actually give the Rocket to Kirill Kaprizov.
Ooh,
little bit like of a wild card,
like
but I think a healthy season for him, and all the contract stuff settled. He's got full belief from his team. He's obviously going to play all the minutes you would need to do it, and we've seen him score goals in the past. I see Kaprizov inching out a healthy and rejuvenated Austin Matthews to win the Rocket Richard.
Okay,
what do you think?
Give me a I like those picks. I especially like the idea of Dollar Bill Kirill showing everyone why he's worth the extension by scoring a ton of goals. You get him in a healthy season, I'm telling you, you're going to see some wonders out of the dude. Connor McDavid going God mode this year in the hopes of winning a Stanley Cup in the last year of his current deal. I also love that scenario too. I also love the fact that you didn't waste any time and you were just like, man, let's just get to the Hart Trophy. Who cares about saving this for the end? And an Art Ross for him too. I like that. Vezina, give me a Vezina trophy pick.
Tough one. The Vasilevsky injury, the fact I have projected Winnipeg maybe to take a step back. So, Hellebuck might not, he won it in a landslide last season. So I'm going to go over to Jake Ottinger.
Ooh, that's my pick too. That's my pick for the Vezina as well.
And I'll say this about the Vezina. If you're not going to, there's only so many goalies that really carry the mail for sure, like 50, 60 games, 55, whatever it ends up being. And that's typically where the Vezina is going to come from, right? And so if I enter that year, like not sure about Vasilevsky, wondering if Winnipeg maybe has a step back, so that could hurt Hellebuck. To me, the next guy I think of is Ottinger. And then I was also in the back of my mind, Julian, I was thinking, he's going to be motivated for, wanting to be at his best for Team USA. Now you could make the case Hellebuck would be in the same spot because it's likely one or the other starting the big games for Team USA when it gets to Milan in February. But, I just think he's ready for the next step. I think it's a big year for the Stars coming off 3 straight trips to the conference final, obviously changing the coach in the offseason. Feels like it's time for Ottinger. He's had a lot of hype around him. And certainly he's had some good seasons, don't get me wrong, but I think it's time for him to almost take the next step. He's got his big contract in his back pocket. That's basically how I landed there. Some of it's vibes, if I'm being honest.
Aren't predictions mostly vibes anyway?
Well, Dallas is going to be good too. Like that's the other, like I'm really confident the Stars are going to win a ton of games this year. So that's usually like, it's either a goalie that's carried a team no one expected maybe to a higher height, or it's basically a goalie on one of the best teams in the league, which is what Hellebuck was last year for Winnipeg when he won it. So that was the other sort of factor I was putting in there.
Give me your Selke trophy pick.
I really pulled my hair out over this one. Obviously, the easiest pick would always be Alexander Barkov entering a season, but unfortunately for him, he's out injured. So I went with his teammate, Sam Reinhart, who I think will get a little more shine in a lineup that doesn't have a Tkachuk or Barkov in it, and a little more appreciation. I'm putting him in the bucket of players. I mean, he's already been named to Team Canada's Olympic roster, but it's a big year for him in terms of, he's going to be a top 6 forward on the Canadian Olympic team. So being in his best sort of shape physically, mentally, and I think, in some ways getting overshadowed a little bit by number 16 that plays alongside him there with the Panthers, maybe has kept Reinhart back a little bit, although they were both finalists last year. So I thought about Anthony Cirelli, Nico Hischier, even Draisaitl, I think, has gotten some Selke love in the last little bit, but ultimately I think it's going to be Sam Reinhart's year.
Did you see Alexander Barkov visit with the Miami Heat earlier this week?
Yeah, I did. How about Eric Spoelstra spilling tea and saying he's going to be back ahead of his 7 to 9 month window?
I was about to say, if he comes back earlier, maybe there's a world he still gets Selke trophy votes.
That's true, but I don't think that's happening.
No,
and I'm sure we're going to have the same Calder trophy pick here, buddy.
Do you want to say it at the same time? 1, 2, 3.
Ivan Demidov. Is it Demidov or Demidov?
I've heard Demidov, actually, but I've also heard Demidov.
We should get to the bottom of that. If we have this guy winning the Calder Trophy, it means we're going to be talking a lot about him. We'll get to the bottom of that for sure. But Ivan Demidov, I think, is going to deliver on his insane hype and promise in Montreal. they need goals, that team too, right? Like that's the other part of it, is sometimes winning the Calder is being put in the positions to have the kind of numbers. And if it happened, I mean, we should look this up. When's the last time a team had two players win the Calder back-to-back years? Because Lane Hudson won the Calder last season. So in the world that this happens, the Canadiens would have two straight Calder Trophy winners, which would be pretty unusual anyway.
Let's see if I could find a way to figure out that particular piece of trivia before this whole entire episode ends. The Norris Trophy, your pick to win that award.
I'm going to go with the man who finished second last season, Zach Werenski.
I like that pick.
You know, look at Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes will be the co-favorites entering the season. I could have easily chosen one of them, and I can very easily see a world where one of them ends up winning it. But I thought, you know, Werenski really took a big step in his career last year. Obviously got a lot of love from the voters to finish second in the voting. And, you know, I still think he's right in the sweet spot where he's got room to grow. And so, you know, part of it is just not picking the obvious. And the other part is damn good player, who took a big step last season. And I think still could even go one more level, which is probably what it takes for him to finish first in the Norris balloting.
And with that, it's time for your way too early Stanley Cup final matchup.
I'll say this, just based on what I've just said before we go further, I should probably have Team USA winning the Olympics, because I'm basically forecasting all these American players to have like these monster seasons. Although I do have McDavid.
Do you have an Olympic prediction?
No, not yet. I haven't thought about it enough. And frankly, it's hard to make the prediction. We only have 6 players for each team. Like, yeah. I think it'll be easier when we see who's in form as the year goes along and get to the final rosters. As for the Cup final, I don't believe we're going to see Florida and Edmonton for a third straight year.
Wow. Well, that can't just. So who are we going to see? Who is it? Come on.
I'm going with the Colorado Avalanche, representing the Western Conference.
Okay.
Your impatient Nate rises again, and I'm going to go against the Carolina Hurricanes.
Ooh, the Mikko Rantanen's going to hate that matchup.
The Mikko Rantanen Bowl, except he has to watch it from home. Yeah, I think it's. I really do. I spoke pretty glowingly about both teams when we did the breakdown there, but I think that they're both going to have monster seasons and be the teams that get it done.
Is it too early to ask who wins?
I'm going to give the Hurricanes the banner.
I thought you were going Colorado on that one.
No, I keep in mind too, Colorado's got Landeskog back for a full season. You know, I think that there's lots of reasons to love their team, but you know, I just think Carolina is also going to continue to find ways to improve the lineup. They've been pretty relentless on that front, and they've got a good team. I think it's a matter of time before they win a cup.
Dallas is my pick to win the Stanley Cup this year.
Nice.
I've been very bullish on Dallas. I think this is the year they figure it out. If they can't figure it out this year, though, I might have to hop off the bandwagon. This has to be it for them this year with the players they have.
Who do you got them beating in the final?
That is super difficult, because it could be Florida if everyone's healthy in time, or like most of their players are healthy in time. Like it could be them. I've thought long and hard and wondered if Toronto might be that team this year. Ooh. Like I wonder if they end up in a conference final against Carolina, and if all those additions work, is this the year they put it together and they finally get over the hump and do it? I've wondered a lot about them. It might end up being Dallas, Carolina, though. But I don't know.
We need you to settle on one. We need you to pick.
I guess I'll say Dallas, Carolina. But what about Tampa? Tampa's good. I don't know. You know, Dallas, Carolina, final answer. Lock it in. Dallas, Carolina.
All right. The good news about that series, and even the Colorado, Carolina wouldn't be so bad, is the travel would be much better than the last two.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
If Dallas is the Western Conference representative, it's easy to fly to Dallas from a lot of the potential places. Like Florida's very close, and even if it was Toronto or whatever, it's those are, you're not doing cross-continent flights.
Also, the barbecue in both Dallas and Carolina for the Stanley Cup final, elite. You had the barbecue between both. Oh, God, I'm jealous.
It would be like 90 plus degrees in both cities.
Oh, my God. In the middle of June, too.
I'll be sweating in a suit.
That's if it happens,
if it happens.
Yeah, because it could easily be Florida, Edmonton, part 3, and then you're going back and forth again. Anyway, great job on all of your predictions, Big Money CJ.
That's a monster episode.
It's a monster episode. As promised, though, I tried to see if I could find any time in NHL history where the Calder Trophy winner came in back-to-back years from the same team. 1953, 1954, the Rangers had it happen. Gump Worsley won in 53. Camille Henry did it in 1954. Unless I missed something, that seems to be the most recent time it's happened where a Calder Trophy winner came from the same team 2 years in a row. I could have missed something. Feel free to hit me in the comments with that, but I believe that might be the most
So we're
recent
talking about a once in 70-year thing, potentially, if Demidov gets the job done. Yeah,
that would be pretty insane. Do you have a stick tap to end off this Thursday? Do you want me to start? Do you want to start?
I've got a stick tap. It's a little bit of a cheeky one, but I will stick tap Max Pacioretty, who took a job with the University of Michigan this week. And the one thing I just want to highlight is a lot of people were using the R word while he took that job. And while it is possible, definitely possible, we've seen Max Pacioretty play his last NHL game, I just don't think the door is 100% closed, 100% for sure on his NHL career. And so while he's taken this job and obviously has had a fine career, you know, the one thing that sticks in my mind is seeing him last year in the playoffs. He had some big moments for the Maple Leafs. You know, he's been kind of, unfortunately, just due to his injuries, he hasn't had a full season in quite some time, but he has shown in manageable sprints or sequences of time that he can still be impactful. I just wonder if someone comes knocking on his door when you get into the new year or after the Olympic break or whenever it might be, if maybe there's a world that he plays again in the league. So I won't call it the R word, but I will say best of luck, Max, with whichever path this goes. And very smart guy, obviously had a long career, big impact in Montreal, but was part of those Vegas teams. And then, you know, maybe has one more chapter still to be written.
Small cross check for myself. The Calder Trophy stat I brought up earlier. Boston happened. It happened in 67 and 68. Bobby Orr, then Derek Sanderson. It happened even more recently than the 50s. So
and those two players are part of, you know, cup winners a couple years later for the Boston Bruins. So I mean, that's where you set the bar, right? If you have two players that are winning the Calder Trophy, you're thinking, okay, the Stanley Cup is the next thing they're going to win together.
Speaking of cross checks, the Quebec City experience, I really enjoyed. That's not what the cross check is for. I got to watch the Canadiens and the Sens. There was a lot of craziness going on. Just the fact that we're just watching these preseason games and seeing a lot of that hoopla and the physicalness and all that. I get it. Like, stuff like that happens at games like that. I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of how that all went down. But to flip that cross check into a stick tap, shout out to all the Quebec City fans who came out for those two games the last few days. Obviously, that market very much would still like an NHL team. The economics don't necessarily support it right now. But I don't think there's any question that Quebec City is a hockey market in some way. And it was really cool to see that on display for the Ottawa Senators games these last few days. And also the rink, the Videotron Center, amazing. Like, you could put that not just on par, but I think it's better than a handful of NHL rinks with its setup. The dressing rooms, the press box area, like they have something in that arena. Again, I don't know if an NHL team's coming there, but I will give a stick tap to the city for how they were the last few days with the NHL games.
Well said.
All right, let's get out of here. This episode has gone on long enough, but thank you so much for tapping in to today's CJ show. Thank you for tapping into all the predictions, and we'll be back early next week with Ask CJ and more great stuff ahead of the NHL season to come. One more week, CJ.
And I want you to tweet at me the word egg sandwich. Egg sandwich. I'm just dropping this in as an Easter egg to see how many people actually got to the end of this episode, because I can't imagine it's too many of you.
All right. Tweet at CJ egg sandwich. Thanks so much for listening, guys.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter at @ReporterChris and follow Julian at JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.